Thank you for tuning into Gods, Demons, and Magic in the Ancient World. This is your host, Sri Sachinandan Das. Today we'll continue our exploration of ancient mysteries and magic, of the worship of gods and demons in antiquity from Egypt and Greece to Persia and India. We continue our study of the Egyptian mysteries by Iamblichus. In our previous episode, we discussed the history of Iamblichus and his teachers, and we discussed the structure of the Egyptian mysteries, which is a conversation presented between Porphyry, the teacher of Iamblichus, and the ancient Egyptian priest known as Abaman. In this text, Porphyry asks many different questions, and the first of which is more or less about the structure of the universe, about the nature of the various gods and the various demons, the various half-gods and heroes, as well as guardian spirits and ancestors were also discussed. Today we're moving on to the next subject Porphyry inquires about, which is oracles and divination. And Porphyry begins by asking about divination through dreams. He says that oftentimes we experience in dreams perceptions of things which are about to occur. And in the ancient Mediterranean world of Porphyry and Iamblichus, oracles were often accompanied by ecstatic dance and music. Very much like the shamanistic traditions, people would enter into a sort of musical trance by dancing around, even like we see with the Native Americans, dancing around and playing musical instruments and pounding until one actually enters into a mystical trance. And so it was quite common that oracles at this time were men and women who could, through the power of chanting these, I guess you could say mantras or prayers or invocations while dancing in music, would actually enter into trance. And you can also see this today with practitioners of Vodun or voodoo, who actually, it's very interesting in voodoo, the way they invoke spirits is through playing various rhythms on drums. The rhythms on the drums are in fact the names of the spirits. They're a certain way of calling a particular spirit. A particular spirit is associated with a particular rhythm. And by beating that rhythm, dancing to that rhythm, absorbing in that rhythm, the individual can actually summon that particular spirit. And it's actually the voodoo practitioners describe that when that spirit descends downward and starts to inhabit their body, the presence of that spirit is so great, because these are powerful spirits, that the individuals surrounding them, just within a 30-40 foot radius, also become, for lack of a better word, possessed. And therefore you'll see that they'll also begin speaking in tongues, and their eyes will roll back in their head, and they'll start sloshing around in the water of the river, and essentially they'll start showing symptoms of possession. But they're sort of just standing within the aura of that particular spirit. The spirit is so powerful they're overwhelmed. But it's one particular individual who is actually totally and completely taken over by that spirit. And generally then you'll have the priest or the assistant voodoo priests will actually come and listen to the mouth of that individual and ask questions to that particular spirit. And the spirit will give answers in various ways. So this is a very ancient tradition, and we can see very similar rites are discussed by Iamblichus. He mentions the Corbiantic rites, and those who become possessed at the Sabazian festivals and celebration of the Divine Mother. So in what is now modern Turkey and Anatolia, there was these various cults where it's actually, you had men, powerful, it was like kind of like a warrior cult, where these warriors would adorn themselves in armor. You can picture the classical Greek armor with the shield and the helmet, like the Spartan armor, and they would dance in circles and worship of the Divine Mother, Cybele. And so you have this kind of very masculine warrior, thunderous dancing, and worship of the Divine Mother again with the rhythm. And then these different Corbiantic priests would actually become overwhelmed by the spirit, much like we see in modern voodoo or Vodun. And so then they themselves would become instruments of the Divine Mother, and they would speak as oracles on behalf of the Divine Mother. So this is a very common way in which at that time oracles were found. And so Iamblichus, or rather Porphyry, is actually asking about dreams, because dreams are much of a different kind of oracle. It's a very personal experience where one, and you may even have this experience yourself, where just by sleeping, you may actually dream of something that happens in the future. And Porphyry also mentions, yet we do not ourselves apprehend these things as clearly as when we are awake. So in other words, you may, the experience of individuals at this time is you're dreaming, and you actually, you may dream the past itself or the future itself completely like a movie. You may actually see the future. That's one way of experiencing a kind of oracular dream. But another way is that, you're given a message through symbolism. And you'll see that this is a very common theme within ancient literatures. In fact, the priests of Egypt, that was one particular profession of certain priests, was to be a interpreter of dreams. People would come to the temple, and they would make offerings, and then they would sleep. They would go to sleep at the temple. And then, depending on the particular deity of that temple, to sort of give them divine inspiration, give them a powerful oracle-type dream, perhaps an answer to a question. And then when they awakened, they would consult the priest. And the priest, one of the functions of the priests, the priesthood, is that they're experts in symbolism. They not only understand the various language, such as scribes, those who write hieroglyphics and the various other forms of writing, but they're completely knowledgeable in the language of symbolism, or divine symbolism, mystic symbolism, associated with the whole occult. And therefore they're able to interpret those dreams according to this sort of language of mystic symbolism. And similarly, the dreams can also be interpreted in accompaniment with astrology, which we'll talk about later, is an oracle science, a science of divination, which is an entire language of symbolism, various layers and layers of symbolism, which then, through one's own practice, both at interpreting astrology, as well as one's spiritual practice of meditation, one's development of intuition through that practice, one's reception of the blessings of the gods, and also one's learning in that particular science of symbolism, which it takes a lot of practice and a lot of experience to learn this sort of very in-depth science. And then also one has to have the level of intelligence to actually draw up charts and to figure out through geometry, etc., the various positions of the planets themselves. So this practice of astrology was a very high science of divination, and an extremely complex and nuanced system of symbolic interpretation. And so you can actually take the symbolism of someone's astrological chart and then utilize that to interpret their dreams. And so it was a very in-depth science how to interpret these dreams. You can also see in the Bible, you have the whole story of Joseph, right? Joseph, he interpreted a dream for the Pharaoh, and this gave him a tremendous amount of influence in society. 7 years of famine, 7 years of plenty, right? So there's this very long tradition in ancient Egypt and throughout the world of dream interpretation. And in just general people oftentimes have this experience. For example, when you're a child, it's not unusual that you may experience powerful dreams of precognition. You may actually see things that then take place days or weeks later. And this is something oftentimes people comment that we lose as we get older, especially as you go through puberty. But we may still even experience it in the form of deja vu, like, what is this? Like, I feel like, I walked into a field and there's a tree and there's a log and there's some flowers. It's like, where did I see this before? Well, yes, I saw a brief image of it in a dream, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago or a month ago. And or you may feel, some kind of like some emotion rise up because of the experience you had of this dream before. So it's quite an amazing thing how somehow or other human beings have this precognitive ability that comes into their dreams, and it's in a very passive way, unlike these sort of practices of conjuring an ecstatic trance and the association of various deities. Now also Iamblichus, or rather Porphyry, Iamblichus is speaking through the means of Porphyry. Now the book itself was written by Iamblichus, or rather it's either written by him or it's written by the individuals within his school that came after him, but it's certainly his teachings. And so it's written as if it's being spoken through Porphyry, his teacher. So Porphyry, he also mentions other forms of divination that were common at the time. He mentions Clarion Apollo of Colophon. And he mentions, of course, the Oracle of Delphi. Now, they're very similar, and the Oracle of Colophon was a female priestess she would actually, they would bring some sort of water before her, he mentions. And this sort of water, she would smell the vapor coming off it, and that would give her inspiration. Whereas the Oracle of Delphi, of course, is very famous, that the Pythia, she would actually sit, and she was an extremely exalted personality. She was considered like the high priestess of Greek society, as well as being honored by individuals from all throughout the Mediterranean. And so this high priestess, she would sit above a crack in the ground. And she's called the Pythias because she would actually, the crack in the ground was considered to go all the way to the center of the earth. And Delphi was considered the center of the earth, or geographically above the very center of the earth, of the universe. And at the very core of the earth, beneath this crack, at its very bottom, was the body of Python, who, we know, of course, means a certain type of snake or serpent. But the original Python is this sort of demonic or this dragon that was destroyed by Apollo himself. And so they considered themselves to be smelling this sort of steam or this scent, this vapor which rose from the body of Python, and then intoxicated with this, they would feel themselves imbued with the power of Apollo himself. And so then they would speak, their particular judgments and predictions. And so this was another well-known kind of oracle. Now it's interesting that Porphyry also inquires about other types of oracles who, what they do is they stand in certain marks that are put upon the ground, and then he says that they're filled with the imperceptible flowing of the divine pleroma. And the pleroma in ancient Greek philosophy was very much like the concept in India of Brahman. It's sort of like the divine, the totality of all divinity and all things. So you might say it's sort of like the absolute truth. And it just sort of, it appears to me, at least what I believe, is that these indented marks being described, it's very similar to what you would see in a magic circle. Now there's a certain mystical symbolism put upon the ground, and then the magician, essentially, or the oracle, stands within these marks and begins his or her invocations. And then by, with great sincerity and faith, chanting these particular prayers or invocations, then sort of raining down from the platform of the divine, they're filled with the power to give oracles. He mentions that some sit in darkness. It's very much like a sensual deprivation. Others take various potions. And he says others are dependent upon singing or magic figures. Now he also mentions that some have likewise established the technique of searching the future by means of entrails, birds, and stars. Now the entrails were, generally any student of history is familiar with the fact that sacrificed animals, their entrails were read much like, in China they would read tea leaves. You'd look at the entrails and see what particular message is being given. Most famous, of course, is the liver. You'll see it all throughout the ancient Mediterranean. You'll have various cultures, throughout the Near East especially, that would remove the liver of a particular animal and then try to read it. In fact, archaeologists often find livers which are carved with very distinct charts on them in order to teach people how to read the various markings upon livers. And of course, he mentions the birds, meaning augury, which is a very ancient system of reading omens, which is more or less looking at the movements of birds and also just animals in general. For example, you'll find in the ancient Vedic literatures of India, you'll find that the presence of animals will often indicate whether a circumstance is auspicious or inauspicious. A very famous example would be like a king is traveling on a road to go to a particular city, and he's being followed by his retinue through the forest. And then if a deer comes bounding forward towards him, everyone will watch and see, does the deer pass on his left side, which is inauspicious, or does it pass on the right side, which is auspicious? And this will, of course, be a good sign if it passes on the right side. If it passes on the left side, then the entire retinue may stop, and the priests or Brahmins, will be consulted, to see, what can we do about this particular inauspicious sign? What exactly does it mean? And so it's quite interesting because whether it be the readings on the entrails or it be the movements of various animals, this is actually considered by many to be part of astrology. Because essentially what you're looking at, when you're looking at the movements of the animals and the various signs on the livers and things like this, is you're really looking at the very moment that you're experiencing and looking towards the various influences of the planets on that moment. So if you see inauspicious omens to the movements of animals, it indicates that there's inauspicious influences of planets. And oftentimes these omens were used in conjunction with astrology. In fact, it's considered a very important part of astrology because it gives you a certain feel for exactly what the reading of the chart of the individual is going to be. For example, if an astrologer is standing on, say, a street in the middle of an ancient village, and a woman comes up, her husband has actually left to go to war, and she's heard rumors that he may be dead, or he may have died, or there was a large battle. And so she may come forward, and she's highly emotional at the time when she comes to the astrologer. This is very important because when an individual is invested with strong emotions, when they're asking a particular question of an astrologer, that indicates that the influence of the planets is very strong at that time, and that therefore the question will be sincere and heartfelt. And if that's the situation, if the question is sort of impelled by the power of that individual's karma or destiny, then the gods themselves will sort of open up and allow a reading to happen which is accurate and clear. In other words, the astrologer will be able to read and understand things clearly because the gods have essentially blessed the process of astrology or divination to work. And there's ways, when one casts an astrological chart for that particular moment, there are various combinations of planets will show if the question is sincere. And if it's not sincere, or if it's not truly heartfelt, or there's some conflict in the asker, or they're looking for some particular answer and they're trying to manipulate the astrologer, then the whole process will be blocked. And therefore the astrologer will say, no, there's no reading at this particular time. So say this woman comes and she's being impelled by strong desire, and the power of the gods is there blessing the situation, then the astrologer will also look at various omens which are happening at the moment. For example, she's worried that her husband may have died. Now, if she sees a man, or the astrologer sees a person walking with a pot of water, and then they drop the pot of water, and right as she's asking, the pot of water shatters, and the water goes all over the ground. Then, and especially even, some dogs or some crows or something come, birds of carrion birds, the battlefield, come and begin drinking that water. That's a very strong sign that the husband may in fact be dead. And then, that may color the interpretation of then the reading which is done at that time. Or, maybe the person carrying the pot starts to drop it, but then the pot doesn't break, or maybe the pot's just cracked, and that may be a sign that the individual is wounded, but the life force, the water, is not spilling out, the blood. Or it may be that there's other signs which show that the spouse is completely fine, that there's no danger at all, or that the spouse has actually won great renown in battle. And so these different things are very important for sort of, like you might say, judging the entire reading itself as it's coming in to the experience of the astrologer. And then there's also different principles in astrology where one will, as soon as one casts a chart, there's certain places one may look in the chart to see what is the condition of the person asking, where have they just come from, what was their immediate experience. For example, say in the chart it shows, the moon is strongly connected with the individual who's asking the question. The astrologer may say, oh, it appears that your mother has sent you. Or, the astrologer may see some very clear combination indicating, yes, the mother has sent you because she's very worried about something. She has a lot of fear. And then if the astrologer tells the potential client or the person asking the question that, it installs a lot of faith inside that individual. Then they're ready to listen. It sort of clears away any doubts, and they're shocked. Oh my gosh, it's a miracle. How did you know? My mother sent me. Like, how do you know these things about me? And even when the individual is walking into the home of the astrologer, what leg do they use to step into the room? All these things are described in astrological texts, because the reading of the omens is an extension of the reading of astrological charts itself.
In this way, the reading of omens and the casting of astrological charts is intimately linked. So in the next episode, we'll go into more detail about the system of astrology and its mystical origins and its relationship with the sun. So thank you very much for listening. If you found value in this, please like and subscribe. If you're listening on iTunes, please visit srisachinandana.com/iTunes and leave a positive review. Thank you again, and we hope you will join us next time on Gods, Demons, and Magic.